Hello, and welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge, and I'm the founder and CEO of Lisa Colledge Consulting. Today, I'm starting a new theme, and that theme is called DEI is Dead, isn't it? Now, obviously, I don't think that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is dead. It's the basis of my business, but I do think that it's time that we leave behind some aspects of that experience which perhaps aren't working as well as they could, learn from having done them, and embark on some new best practice. And I think it's also time that we challenge some opinions that in my experience are quite ingrained. So I'm going to start doing that in this episode, which is called Rethinking DEI, Organizational as well as Individual Benefit. And essentially, I'm going to make my business case for why you as a leader should care about and should invest in DEI. It's not difficult to find rumors. If you talk to people, if you read articles, if you look at social media, rumors that many CEOs, many C-suite members, many senior leaders have become skeptical about DEI programs. You may think when you listen to me talking about neurodiversity or the more inclusive version of that, cognitive inclusion, oh my goodness, here's just another dimension to add to the ever-growing list. And indeed, when you think about diversity programs, representational targets, they do just sum up into a long list, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. They probably don't talk to each other. So you could be forgiven for thinking, here's yet another dimension, neurodiversity, and got to add it to the list, and I'm tired. There's a name for this. It's called diversity fatigue. Now, focusing on diversity and representational targets is one of the approaches that I believe has served us well, but we need to move on from, right? So I'm going to talk about that more in my next episode. But what I want to do today, as I say, is to focus on the business case for DEI. I'll just ask you to go with me and believe all DEI approaches are not equal. I will explain in the next episode the basis for saying that, but all DEI approaches are not equal, and it is well worth you thinking about the measurable benefit to your organization that you can put in place if you focus strategically as leadership on DEI. I'm emphasizing the strategically, and I'm emphasizing the leadership, because this is different to supporting lots of employee resource groups, ERGs, or employee networks. I don't want to dismiss the fantastic work that ERGs or employee networks do. I definitely think that they have a role to play, but it's not enough to expect that they can deliver the benefit that I'm going to be talking about. I think it's really important to focus on the organizational benefit that you can derive, because it's not enough for an organization to do something only because it's the right thing. Of course, that matters. Of course, it's a motivator, and perhaps it's why you support your ERGs or employee networks. You give people time to participate in them, and perhaps you give them a bit of budget. But I don't think that doing the right thing is enough on its own for the leadership of an organization to prioritize a DEI initiative, and in so doing, deprioritize another initiative, which could be revenue generating or otherwise value generating. The reason I say that is because I believe an organization's primary purpose is to provide value for its owners, for its shareholders, for its customers. That value should be provided in a good, responsible way. I do think that that is important, but the value is the primary purpose. And so it is worth us thinking about how we can embed DEI in an organization so that it boosts its value. For an organization, that should be the primary purpose. DEI should be an enabler of the organizational mission. And I think that if we can prove that case, leadership should be very interested in DEI. So for the rest of this episode, I'm going to focus on inclusion So DEI now becomes inclusion. I'm not going to focus on diversity, and I'll explain why in the next episode. I'm going to focus on inclusion and the difference it makes from a personal perspective, and then I'll move to the difference it makes from an organizational perspective. All right, so let's start with a personal perspective. I think inherently we know that it's clear that if somebody can be themselves at work, they're going to be happier, they're going to be healthier, they're going to be mentally more well. Of course, that will translate into less sick leave and a lower likelihood of burnout. And avoiding or at least reducing these costs is a significant benefit for you. Great. But what I would really like to do is find a positive addition, not just a removal of some cost, but a positive addition to your organization's success from inclusion. I want to illustrate that benefit by sharing some of the results of a published research study that I spent a lot of hours diving into during one of the assignments for my psychology degree. And what this research paper looked at was the cognitive consequences, so the actual mental performance consequences of looking at ourselves as a group of diverse identities. Now, the researchers, Gaither, Fan and Kinsler, published this paper in 2020. If you want the paper or you want the full reference, please get in touch with me. I'm happy to provide them. They worked with 6 to 7-year-old children, boys and girls, lots of different ethnicities, and they assigned these children randomly to one of 2 groups. One group was called the multiple identities group, and one group was called the physical traits group. And regardless of which group a child was randomly assigned to, when they came into the room where the experiment was being conducted, they had a discussion with a researcher about 8 things, and the discussion was scripted and it was based on an image, and that's important because then you know that the results cannot be explained by differences in the way that discussion was conducted in the beginning. So the children in the multiple identities group had a discussion about elements of their identity. Right? It was things like the city that you're from, whether they like sports, whether they are a neighbour, what gender they are, and things like that. 8 different identities which all existed in them at the same time. And the children in the physical traits condition also had a discussion about 8, but in this case, attributes, right, that all exist within them at the same time. But it's just things that you can see, like having 2 eyes, or a mouth and teeth, or 2 legs. And then the researchers that had conducted the discussion left, and a different researcher came in who didn't know which condition the children were in. So this was a blinded test. And that second researcher conducted 4 thinking challenges with the children. And these were all done in different orders, so the order didn't make any difference to the results. It was all corrected for and controlled. But the thinking challenges tested flexible thinking. So they did 4 thinking challenges, and in all of them, the children in the multiple identities condition did better than children in the physical traits condition. And in 3 of those conditions, in 3 of those tests, the difference was significant. Well, let me tell you what those tests were, so you get an idea of the kind of thinking that improved just by thinking of yourself as a lot of different identities. So in the first test, the child was shown a picture of a bear who really wanted to get this honey pot in a tree. I really want the honey in the tree. And the honey pot was on the first branch, so the bear couldn't climb up the tree. And the bear had a bowl of Lego to try to reach the honey pot. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough Lego in the bowl to stack it up so that the bear could stand on top of it and reach the honey pot. So how did the bear get the honey? Now, the answer was that it wasn't about the Lego, it was about the bowl. So if the bear would empty the Lego out of the bowl, turn the bowl upside down and stand on top of it, then the bear would be tall enough to get the honey pot. The second flexible thinking test was about how many uses for a gold box a child could think of. And is it obvious ones, right? Like putting something in it, putting something on it, perhaps. But the idea was that they would think of novel uses for this gold box. And the third flexible thinking test where there was a significant difference was being able to group or categorize items together that didn't look the same. Being able to recognize that something is similar to something else, categorize things, that's an important step in children's development. And first they'll categorize similar things together, and in a more advanced stage or an older stage of their development, they'll be able to categorize things that don't look the same as each other, but they can go together. So children were better able to group together items that didn't resemble each other. The researchers went on in the paper to show that it wasn't enough to just think about different identities in terms of somebody else. You actually had to think about it in terms of yourself, right? So people actually had to think about how they themselves were lots of different things all integrated together. So it wasn't just the fact of thinking about something complex, which made children better at performing these flexible thinking tests. You had to think about yourself, your own identity, as something that was multifaceted. Interesting, yeah? So now let's apply this kind of improved flexibility of thinking to a group of children who are working together. They're not answering questions on their own, but children working in a group. In this paper that I'm talking about, the children were 9 or 10 years old, but this has been shown in all kinds of different ages of children. In this case, the children were talking about science, but it's also true for all kinds of different topics in school. But okay, I'm using this as an example. So 9 to 10-year-old children were talking about something to do with science. And they were encouraged to share their opinions about this question and to negotiate an agreed position. So the children were what's called scaffolded in doing this. They were supported and guided in doing this because this is not something that children do naturally on their own. So they were scaffolded to share their opinions about science and negotiate an agreed position. And then their academic scores were measured. And their academic scores in science went up. And their reasoning improved also significantly. It's also really interesting. So you're encouraging children to share something inherent about themselves, to share an opinion, to share an aspect of their identity, not to feel that they have to conform to what is expected or to the right answer. And you're helping them to explore other opinions, to be open to difference, to take on board somebody else's opinion, to adjust their own opinion, to change their own opinion, or maybe to improve the reasoning behind their own opinion because their thinking process has been challenged. And that process, that makes each child perform better, and you can measure that improvement in performance. Isn't that something that you want in your organization? So, okay, people feel better when they can bring their whole identity to work. That's great. But when people actively think about themselves as a collection of identities, when they don't have to hide or conceal anything, when they don't have to conform, they think better. That individual flexible thinking is better. And if you stimulate this authenticity in a group, their performance also improves. I'm emphasizing that you do need to scaffold or support this performance in a group. This doesn't happen on its own because people naturally and instinctively are biased against difference. Right? Back when things used to attack us or eat us when they look different from us, and we had to react quickly to stay alive. This kind of thinking was a benefit because it let us make a quick decision and decide whether to fight or flee. but it's not naturally in us. So it does have to be supported, it has to be trained. But when we support or train groups of people to be open to each other's opinion, then they perform better. So if your organization is like this, then you are an organization in which inclusion has been strategically implemented, led by leadership. The different dimensions that people bring to your organization, whether that's a gender dimension, whether it's an ethnicity dimension, whether it's a different social background or a different educational background, whether it's a different thinking style, doesn't matter. People have been trained to integrate all of those different aspects of themselves and see the differences as interesting and ways to stimulate their thinking, and they have improved their performance. So clearly this takes effort, it takes training, it takes culture change, which is my business, but is it worth it? What's the impact on your organization? Now, to look at that, we can look at the literature on engagement. And there's a big opportunity to improve engagement by allowing people to bring their authentic self to your organization. We can see this from reports from McKinsey. So the most recent report from McKinsey about how engaged people are in their organization does not really make very happy reading, to be honest. What they report is that in a typical organization, and this doesn't matter if you're a big or a small organization, a startup or an established organization, which industry you're in a typical organization, only 4% of employees are what they call thriving stars, and they are people who align really, really, really strongly with their employer's mission. They love working on it. They'll do anything to get the organization closer to that mission, and their passion and their positivity also have a positive impact on the performance of the people around them. Unfortunately, that is more than overwhelmed by the 11% of productivity and energy vampires. So these are actively disengaged people. It's opposite the thriving stars. Their behavior is toxic, right? It's really negative. It's really demotivating. It's energy draining, also contagious, and also impacts other team members. So you might think that between these two extremes, most people are engaged, but no, between these two extremes, most people are passively disengaged. 62% of people are passively disengaged. So they don't fight to change anything. They're not vocal about their dissatisfaction, but they've just checked out quite quietly. And they do as little as possible while not giving their managers any reason to reprimand them. So they're just taking their paychecks and doing as little as possible. Thank you very much. But they don't really care whether you get closer to your mission or not. So you have a massive room, most likely, for improvement in engagement in your organization. And what happens when employees become more engaged? What happens to an organization's metrics? Now, for these metrics, we can look at some really interesting reports that Gallup have been publishing for a lot of years. Gallup run this enormous study. They have surveyed tens of thousands of companies and goodness knows how many employees, again, across all industries, all geographies, all sizes of corporate organizations. And they have compared the performance of organizations that have very high levels of employee engagement with those that have very low levels of employee engagement. So to be precise, they've compared the top quartile of organizations by engagement with the bottom quartile of organizations by engagement. Let's first of all look at the kind of personal metrics. The most engaged corporate organizations have 68% higher well-being of people. Incredible, isn't it? 68% and 78% lower absenteeism. Incredible. So imagine how much that will save you just by having people more physically present in their jobs and not sick or not detached. Because people, of course, like working in those organizations, they are also less likely to leave, right? So there's also a 51% lower turnover of employees. When Gallup looks at business metrics, they find, and I don't think it's very surprising, although perhaps the size of the correlation is surprising, Gallup finds that there's a 49% correlation between employee engagement and composite business performance. So it means pretty much that whatever metric you choose to look at your business performance by, it's higher when your employees are engaged. And 49% of the variability is explained by employee engagement. So quite impressive. So if you want to look at productivity, 15% higher. If you want to look at profitability, 23% higher. And I'm also going to throw in here a metric about innovation, although that's a theme that I'm going to come to in future, because it's really interesting in terms of cognitive inclusion. But the Boston Consultancy Group has done a study showing that even when you have a leadership team, we're not even talking about the rest of the organization here, but when your leadership team is inclusive of a couple of dimensions of diversity, then innovation revenue, new revenue from stuff launched in the last 3 years, is 19% higher. Incredible. So there you have it. DEI is not something to do for the sake of it when you're an organization. I believe it should be an enabler to the organizational mission, to your organizational mission, and that any inclusion or DEI strategy should show you how the actions that you take, the DEI actions that you take, will impact the organizational outcome. I've shown you that being inclusive and really being authentic and bringing your whole self to work has a measurable impact on the performance of individuals. And if you invest in ensuring that these kind of boosted individuals can work effectively in teams, then all of your metrics will go up.